He spent $2 million on a wedding designed to destroy her. He invited his pregnant ex-wife to watch him marry a younger woman in a Beverly Hills ballroom dripping with crystal and gold. He wanted her to stand there in rags while 500 powerful guests laughed at her failure. He wanted to erase her from existence. But when those golden doors swung open, every guest stopped breathing, because the woman who walked in was not the broken ghost he remembered. She arrived in a sapphire gown on the arm of a billionaire whose wealth made his look like pocket change, and behind her walked 3 small children in perfect formal wear. His children. The ones he called burdens, the ones he abandoned. And what happened next didn't just ruin his wedding, it destroyed his entire empire in front of every camera in the room. This is the story of Ryan Mitchell, a man who believed cruelty was strategy and love was weakness. He built a kingdom on stolen money and broken promises. He threw away his pregnant wife and called it smart business. He married a woman half his age and called it an upgrade. And then he made one catastrophic mistake. He invited the woman he destroyed to watch him celebrate. He thought she would crawl. Instead, she brought the truth. And the truth burned his palace to the ground. Stay with me until the end, because what happens at this wedding will shock you. And the lesson this story carries might just change how you see your own life. This story is about something every woman needs to hear. Your worst chapter is not your final chapter. The people who discard you do not get to define you. If that message matters to you, hit subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. Drop a comment and tell me, have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have loved you? Now, let's begin.
A nervous energy filled my ballroom. Some said she wouldn't have the courage to face me. Others laughed, picturing her in rags. Vanessa smirked beside me, eager for the kill. I lifted my glass, tasting the victory I had so carefully engineered. Then, the great doors swung wide. A collective gasp swept the room. A black limousine announced an arrival of impossible stature. And from it emerged Emily Carter. She was not the ghost I remembered. She was a queen. Her gown flowed like liquid moonlight. Her posture was regal, her gaze steady and unbroken. Beside her stood Alexander Harrington, a man whose wealth dwarfed my own. His hand rested on her back, a clear sign of protection, and behind them walked 3 small figures in perfect formal wear. My children, the triplets, the music died, champagne glasses hung in the air, the whispers ceased, replaced by a suffocating silence. For the first time all night, my confident smile vanished. Before this moment, before this horrifying vision of her rebirth, my memory of Emily was one of quiet compliance. She was not from this world of power. She was from a world of shadows. I found her on the faded edges of Phoenix, raised by a working mother who measured wealth in warmth, not capital. Emily was naive. She valued sacrifice and other pointless virtues. When I met her at 22, she saw a fairy tale. I saw potential, raw material. I was older, a rising power, and my words were currency she gladly accepted. I promised her comfort. I promised her security. I offered her a world she could never have built on her own. Her mother saw a risk. Emily saw a savior. She gave me everything. Her heart, her future, her loyalty. In the beginning, the arrangement was perfect. I gave her gifts. I whispered the words she needed to hear. She was my perfect accessory. She quit her meaningless job to manage my home, to support my ascent. She believed this was love. I knew it was a transaction, but as my power grew, her value diminished. She became a weight. Then came the pregnancy, her last, desperate bid for relevance. I saw her joy and felt only disgust. You cannot even manage yourself, I told her. How will you manage 3? Because fate had played its sick joke. Triplets. What she saw as a miracle, I saw as a terminal diagnosis for our arrangement. The bills, the demands, the weakness. I faced it with cold logic. I cut the cord. I stopped coming home. I removed her from my house with only what she could carry. As I soared in new suits and faster cars, she slept on a borrowed couch. She whispered promises to the burdens inside her. I will protect you. Empty words. The nights were hers to endure alone. Her tears were her own. She scrubbed floors, her belly swollen, saving pennies for a future I had already deemed bankrupt. People stared at her, some with pity, some with contempt. Her body broke, her spirit fractured, but she did not surrender. Every kick was a reminder of her foolish, emotional fight. When the children were born, 2 boys and a girl, her world became smaller, and her resolve hardened. She hid her tears and hummed old songs. She starved herself so they could eat. She mistook suffering for strength. The world called her a discarded wife. I called her a lesson learned. But she carried something I had not accounted for. Something forged in poverty and pain. Resilience. It was that irritating, stubborn quality that powered her entrance tonight. This was not a moment of her humiliation. It was the beginning of my own. The woman I left for dead had refused to be buried. My ballroom was a kingdom. It was larger than a sports field, with marble pillars reaching for ceilings that dripped with light. This evening was not a wedding. It was a coronation, a spectacle of my power. My marriage to Vanessa was a declaration of my ascent. I had risen above my past. I had left the weakness of my former life behind. Gold-edged invitations had summoned the city's royalty. The most important people were here tonight. Investors, politicians, stars. They all came to witness my power. The media waited outside, hungry for a glimpse of my perfect world. Limousines delivered guests in gowns and suits that cost a fortune. The air was thick with false laughter and the clinking of glasses. We toasted to power, not to love. I stood at the head of it all, smiling the smile of a king. My arm was around Vanessa, a perfect vision. She wore my wealth like a second skin. At 26, she was a masterpiece of ambition. Once a nobody, she now stood beside me at a wedding worth millions. She whispered into my ear, her eyes scanning the room as if it were her prize. The cameras adored her. She did not care about the whispers of my ex-wife. In fact, she welcomed them. She wanted to see Emily break. My men clapped my shoulder. They congratulated me on my upgrade. My guests raised their glasses. They were not celebrating a marriage. They were securing their own futures. In my hall, everything was for sale, even dignity. I raised my own glass. Tonight, I declared, I bury the past. Only success is ahead. But I had not invited Emily just to show her my new life. I wanted a performance. I needed her to be the symbol of my complete and total victory. Her failure would make my success shine brighter. Some guests knew the story. They laughed at the thought of her arriving in a worn-out dress, looking tired, looking defeated. She will probably beg, I had joked. We will all have a good laugh. The orchestra began to play. The stage was set. The room was filled with expensive perfume and anticipation, but beneath the polished surface, a tension grew. Everyone was waiting. Would she really come? Near the grand doors, a silence began to spread. A valet spoke in a low voice to the staff. The music wavered. Heads began to turn. They were all looking at the golden doors, waiting. I smiled. My trap was ready. Vanessa's own smile grew wider, hungry. The guests leaned in, thirsty for the drama. Not one of them knew. The woman about to enter was not the victim they expected. She was the executioner. Model. This was not a deception. This was a correction. Here, in this grand hall, I looked every bit the man I was meant to be. I was a success, a winner. This beautiful young woman at my side was the prize I had earned. My tuxedo felt like armor. My smile was a declaration of victory. Ambition required a certain ruthlessness. My path was not built on simple effort. It was forged in necessary sacrifices and difficult choices. When I first met Emily, my life was small. She offered a simple comfort that I mistook for support. But as my world expanded, she remained the same. She became an anchor. I saw her plainness as a reflection on me. She could not keep pace with the life I was building. Her attempts to preserve our small world felt like a cage. Then came the news of 3 children. Her announcement was not a gift. It was a sentence. 3 weights to drag me down. 3 new mouths that would consume my future. She was destroying everything I had worked for. My life was finally taking shape, and she tried to ruin it. That night, her tears were a form of manipulation. I had to leave. I had to save myself. Emily was a mistake I needed to fix. Now there was Vanessa. She was the perfect solution. Vanessa was what I deserved. She was vibrant and saw the world as I did. She belonged in this life of power and influence. To everyone, she was a symbol of my ascent. She was a beautiful face for a magazine cover, but behind that beauty was a mind that matched my own. She did not seek love. She sought power. With me, she saw a future of limitless luxury, the jewels, the estates, the absolute freedom of wealth. It was Vanessa who understood the need for a final public statement. You must invite her, she had insisted. Show her precisely what she is no longer a part of. Her logic was flawless. This was not about simple cruelty. It was a strategic move to secure my new legacy. Together, Vanessa and I were a force. We understood that sentiment was a weakness. Our shared ambition was a bond stronger than any vow. The murmurs in the crowd did not bother us. We heard admiration, not judgment. We had built this life ourselves. We were beyond the opinions of lesser people. As I guided Vanessa through the ballroom, my pride was absolute. Each jealous look from another man was a tribute. I imagined Emily arriving, a ghost from a past I had shed. Vanessa felt it too. Her hand on my arm was firm, her eyes shining with a shared sense of triumph. We had written the perfect final scene. Emily would be the footnote. I would be the victor. Vanessa would be my queen. But we had misjudged one small detail. We had written a story about a character who no longer existed. The woman we had cast as weak was about to rewrite the ending. Our entire kingdom was a beautiful illusion about to be washed away. And the storm was already here. Humiliating Emily was not a petty act. It was a carefully planned conclusion, a final closing of the books. As flowers were arranged and vows were rehearsed, Vanessa and I perfected our strategy. "Are you certain she will appear?" Vanessa had asked, her voice smooth like the champagne in her glass. I had no doubts. "She will be here," I assured her. Pride would not let her stay away. If not pride, then a pathetic curiosity. She would need to see for herself. She would need to witness what I had become without her. Vanessa smiled. "Good. When she steps inside this room, she will understand she is an outsider, and everyone here will see it too." We savored the image. I saw Emily entering, wearing something cheap and out of fashion. She would be clutching a worn-out purse. I could picture her standing alone by the wall. The cameras would flash, capturing Vanessa and me in our glory. The contrast would be a masterpiece. Emily, the failure. Vanessa, the prize d'amapapodize. But Vanessa wanted more than a silent victory. She demanded a complete surrender. "We must guide the reporters," she proposed. "I will point them in her direction. We will pose for them while she stands beside us, completely invisible." She would be a phantom at our celebration. I embraced the genius of it. And during the toast, I added, I will speak of those who held me back. I will thank those who helped me fly. Everyone would understand my meaning. The silent laughter would be her undoing. The plan grew more perfect with each detail. Vanessa's delight was intoxicating. My own satisfaction was immense. This wedding was not about romance. It was about solidifying my power. It was proof that my choice was correct. Even the tables were arranged for maximum impact. I told the staff to leave one chair open at the back, for the former wife, should she arrive. Vanessa made sure the most notorious gossips were seated nearby. They would spread the story before the night was over. That morning, I looked at my reflection. I adjusted my cufflinks. I was not just a groom. I was a king claiming his throne. Tonight, I thought, she ceases to exist. Vanessa, radiant in her gown, echoed my sentiment. Tonight, I am the only Mrs. Mitchell. We never considered that our stage was a trap. We never imagined the truth could be a weapon. Emily was not coming as the victim we had created. She was coming with an army we did not know existed. The beautiful trap we had built for her was about to close. But we were the ones who were caught. The night before, I thought of her. I pictured her in that small, cheap apartment, surrounded by noise and mess. The room would be dark. Shadows would crawl up the stained walls. Her children would be crying in the other room. The image pleased me. It was confirmation. I saw her sitting there, tired and broken. Life without me was exactly as it should be. Impossible. She was working meaningless jobs, cleaning up after other people. Her hands would be rough. Her body would be aching from labor she was not built for. Sleep would be a luxury she could not afford. The world I inhabit would seem like a distant dream to her now. Old acquaintances would ignore her. People would whisper that she had aimed too high and deserved her fall. I imagined her in public, with 3 children and no husband, a portrait of failure. I could see her at a store, her face burning with shame as she paid for cheap formula. That thought gave me a particular satisfaction. That night, as she put her children to sleep, she was probably weeping, making them promises she could never keep, vows to protect them from a world that saw them as a burden, the same burden I had escaped. But her strength was an illusion. Inside she was shattered. The wedding invitation would be on her table, a golden mockery of her pathetic life. She knew exactly why I had sent it. She knew it was a command performance. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. She was there to be a prop in my triumph. She would feel rage, but beneath it, she would feel the cold dread of her own irrelevance. A part of her would want to hide, to refuse me this final victory, but she could not. She had to see it. She had to face the man who had erased her so completely. I imagined her fear, the thought of entering that ballroom, dressed in rags, with the weight of judgment from every eye, my cold smile, Vanessa's beauty. The whispers would cut through her. There she is, the poor thing he left behind. Her pain would be exquisite. The finality of it all would crush her. As she slept, she would dream of me. She would see my success. She would see Vanessa wearing the jewels that should have been hers. She would see herself as I saw her, a ghost, alone and utterly defeated. She did not understand that this moment was her destiny, to be the foundation upon which I built my new life. Her lowest point was necessary for my highest achievement. That morning, light in her miserable apartment was not a sunrise. It was the dim opening of the final act of her tragedy. This day was a monument to my success. I felt the crisp collar against my neck. Every detail was perfect. The air smelled of money and victory. I had left the past behind, a past of sickness and struggle. a past that tried to drown me. Those 3 small burdens were her problem now, not mine. I had made the right choice, the only choice. A sharp knock on a door I no longer answered. It meant nothing to me. Everyone who mattered was right here. In this city, I was known. I was admired. A man who built his own destiny. A man who shed his weaknesses like old skin. People respected that. Power respects power. I had seen her name in my mind, a footnote in a story about my rise. Emily Carter, a whisper of a memory. Her weakness was not my burden. I had given her an invitation, a final courtesy, a chance for her to see what she had lost, what she had held me back from. For a moment, her face floated in my memory. Then it was gone. I would not allow her ghost to haunt my triumph. Ryan made this choice. I told myself firmly, I was not sent by weakness. I was here because I had watched my own ambition nearly die. I saw what poverty and sickness could do to a man. It nearly destroyed my father, and later, my wife. Her strength failed when I needed it most. I fought to save my future. I did everything I could, but she was a weight I could not carry. I know what it feels like to watch your dreams suffer, to see them poisoned by circumstance, and I swore I would never let it happen to me again. Her quiet suffering was not my concern. I would not feel pity. It was a poison. I offered her nothing. This was my justice. Ryan thinks he can rise above his past. He can. I will not be dragged down by anyone. She had to fight her own battles, alone. My heart felt nothing. Not disbelief, not hope, just the cold, hard certainty of my success. A man like me, with this power, did not care about her. When I looked in the mirror, I saw no judgment, only strength, the reflection of a man who had won. I knew she could not walk into this wedding. Not like that. Not when I wanted her to see my glory. I wanted her to fall apart. Then she would not walk in as my mistake. A voice in my head whispered. She would walk in as the woman I erased. I would make sure of it. That promise was a shield. For the first time, I felt the last spark of doubt leave my chest. I did not realize that this woman, remade by her own pain, supported by another's power, was about to turn my perfect stage into the battlefield of my ruin. And Emily Carter had found a man who never entered a battle he could not win. The days leading to my wedding were perfect. I moved between fittings and meetings. The doubts were gone. I felt no claws at my chest. I had made the right decision. Every time I saw the invitation on my desk, I felt the weight of my success settle on me. I wanted her humiliated. I wanted her broken. And Alexander Harrington was a name I knew, but a man I did not fear. On the morning of my wedding, a fleet of luxury cars waited for my guests. I stared through the window at my new world. The neighbors were powerful people. They were my peers. For the first time, I was not leaving a cramped apartment with worry. I was stepping into my destiny. Ryan, Vanessa said, taking my hand as I approached. Today is about us. It is about you reclaiming your place in the world. Let us show them who you truly are. Inside the ballroom, the champagne gleamed. Soft music filled the air, and a string quartet waited. I sighed. This is perfect. I deserve this. Vanessa smiled. You have given up enough. Let me give this to you. The stylist guided me through my final checks. Each detail was more expensive than the last. At first, I felt a flicker of the old life. My fingers remembered cheap fabric. But when I looked at the golden room, the feeling vanished. My tuxedo was a suit of armor, the color of power. For the first time, I did not see a man who had struggled. I saw a king. My children, I barely thought of them. Little ghosts in tuxedos and dresses. Their cheers were meaningless. Mother, "You look so beautiful," one of them might say to her. Tears were her language, not mine. She had only ever seen me as a provider. Tonight, the world would see my strength. The lights would wash away the shadows of my past. Soft music framed my entrance. A diamond watch, Vanessa's quiet gift, rested on my wrist. I touched it confidently. She had said simply, "Consider it a crown." As my car rolled toward the Beverly Hills Grand Hotel, my nerves were calm. I imagined Emily's tears, her loneliness, the whispers of her failure. My palms were dry. Alexander would not be there. What does a storm do, Ryan? I asked myself. It washes away the weak. It clears the path. Tonight, I was that storm. I exhaled, a sharp laugh escaping my lips. For years, I had been climbing, fighting, trying to win. Tonight, I would not hide. Tonight, I would walk into the ballroom, not as Emily's struggling husband, but as the man who escaped her. The limousine slowed before the glowing entrance of the hotel. Photographers clustered outside. Their cameras flashed for me, for Vanessa. The moment my doors opened, the crowd roared. I stepped out, powerful, my bride trailing like a queen, her family at our side, exuding wealth. For the first time, the world was not ignoring me. It was in awe. And inside, my perfect stage was about to become my greatest triumph. The Beverly Hills Grand Hotel glittered like my own kingdom. That night, guests swirled across the ballroom in gowns and tuxedos. Their laughter echoed my own success. The string quartet played a triumphant tune. To the elite gathered there, the night was a showcase of my new power. But within minutes, it would become something I never imagined. The golden doors at the entrance opened slowly. The first sound to break the music was a collective gasp. A sleek black limousine had pulled up. It was not one of ours. Photographers pressed forward, their shouts rising. "Who is it? Who's arriving now?" And then she stepped out. Emily Carter, no longer the tired woman I had discarded. No longer the weak wife I believed she would always be. Tonight she was a vision. Her sapphire gown shimmered. Her hair fell in soft curls. A diamond pendant mocked me from her throat. Her back was straight. Her chin was lifted. Her eyes were calm. She carried herself with the grace of a woman who had found a new weapon. The murmurs grew louder. "Is that her? Ryan's ex-wife. She looks incredible. I thought he'd destroyed her." But Emily was not alone. Beside her walked Alexander Harrington, the billionaire whose presence silenced the room. His dark suit was a statement. His hand rested protectively on her back. The sight of him sent a cold shock through me. Guests whispered frantically. "Why is she with him? Alexander never appears with anyone. What does this mean?" And then the final attack. 3 small figures, her triplets, dressed in tiny tuxedos and a sparkling dress. Their wide eyes were filled with her victory. They clung to her hands, a public accusation against me. Gasps turned into stunned silence. Whispers hissed across the hall. "They are his children. They look just like Ryan. My God, he abandoned them." Inside the ballroom, my confident smirk froze. My champagne flute trembled in my hand. For weeks, I had planned this moment. The moment Emily would show up and humiliate herself. But as I watched her glide into the room with a billionaire and 3 living reminders of my past, the humiliation was mine. Vanessa's face hardened, her perfect smile cracked. She gripped my arm, her nails digging deep. "What is she doing here? And with him?" she hissed. The orchestra faltered. Every eye turned toward the entrance. The ballroom, once my stage of triumph, had become a courtroom. All eyes followed Emily as she stepped onto the marble floor. Her heels clicked in rhythm with my pounding heart. Emily did not rush. She did not shrink. She moved with a purpose I had never seen. Her gaze was fixed forward, ignoring the whispers, ignoring my pale face. She was not here as my victim. She was here as my executioner. And as the doors closed behind her, sealing the silence, one truth burned me. It was a perfect scene, a monument to my success. I deserved this hall, these lights, this admiration. Then she appeared, a ghost at the feast I had so carefully prepared. The room fell silent, but not with the pity I expected. They were captivated by her, by the children, my children. She stood there, a sapphire stain on my perfect white canvas. Alexander Harrington was her prop, a pathetic shield. This was not how I wrote the story. A hot rage coiled in my gut. I had to reclaim the narrative. I moved, a practiced smile on my lips, my glass held high. This was my stage. I spoke, my voice a blade wrapped in silk. Well, well. The words echoed. A perfect, clean sound. Look who decided to show up. My ex-wife. How touching. The crowd's unease was a sweet melody. Vanessa's hand on my arm was an anchor, her smirk a silent approval. I moved toward Emily, a shark circling its prey. She had to be reminded of her place. Tell me, Emily, did you borrow that gown? Her defiance was a novelty. Or perhaps Mr. Harrington here bought it for you. I needed them to see her, as I did. A charity case. It must feel strange, doesn't it? Walking into a place like this after living in, what was it, a rundown apartment? A few weak chuckles started. That was all I needed. Her silence was predictable. But his hand on her back, that was new. That was a challenge. I pressed closer, letting my voice sharpen. The children were a crude, obvious ploy. And bringing the children, my God, Emily. Was that for sympathy? I wanted to expose her manipulation. Or did you hope someone here would take pity and write you a check? The gasps were satisfying. They saw her desperation now, just as I did. The children pulled closer to her, small actors in her sad play. I almost felt the old power over her, the way she would shrink under my gaze, but his eyes were on her. He was poisoning her, making her forget her place before she could utter a coached response. He spoke. His voice was a quiet insult, a challenge to my authority in my own hall. You speak of pity, Mr. Mitchell, he began, his stare empty. But what I see before me is not a woman. I saw a mistake, a project he had foolishly taken on. I see a woman who has endured more than you could ever bear, and she has done it with dignity. I had to laugh. The absurdity was overwhelming. Who was this man to lecture me on my own history? His smile was cold, an imitation of true power. I am the man who stands beside her when you chose to walk away. He said it like a victory. I am the man who sees her worth while you discarded it. He saw a salvage project. And I am the man who will ensure the world knows the truth about the kind of husband you were. The whispers turned. Vanessa's fingers dug into my arm. My face burned. This was my wedding. You don't belong here, I seethed. But then she stepped forward, her voice a strange, new thing. No, Ryan, you're wrong. I belong here more than you think. Because while you celebrate your new life, you can never erase me or the children you abandoned. We are living proof of the man you truly are. The air crackled. Their eyes were daggers now. Judgment. I opened my mouth, but the words were gone. For the first time, I was silenced. My beautiful empire, built on careful stories, showed its first crack. The room felt like a courtroom. Every whisper was an indictment. Emily's words hung in the air, a poison. It was Alexander who held their attention now. He was the conductor of my ruin. My throat was tight. Enough, I managed. My voice thin. This circus ends now. Security. I needed control back. I needed them out. He simply raised a hand. The gesture stopped me cold. "Before you try to throw her out, Mr. Mitchell," he said, his tone infuriatingly calm, "perhaps you should worry about what I've brought with me tonight." A thrill of fear and curiosity went through the crowd. They were vultures, waiting for a carcass. I forced a laugh. It sounded brittle. "And what exactly have you brought? Pity? Empty speeches? This is my night, Harrington, not yours." His eyes narrowed. This was a performance, and he was sampiamum, and he was enjoying it. "What I have, Timtin," he said, his hand moving to his jacket, "is the truth." He produced a black folder, a cheap prop. He placed it on a table, the sound echoing in the sudden silence. He opened it slowly, for dramatic effect. "These," Alexander's voice cut through the silence, "are financial records." The words landed like stones. "Records that prove Ryan Mitchell has been embezzling funds from his company for over 2 years." The room erupted. Embezzling was such an ugly word. It was creative accounting. It was survival. It was the cost of building this very world they all admired. Lies. The denial was automatic, a reflex. "Those are fabricated. He's trying to slander me." He had to be bluffing. Not fabricated, verified. Bank transfers, routed through offshore accounts, shell companies, masking losses, and stolen funds redirected into your personal lifestyle. Vacations, cars, even this wedding. His gaze was a physical weight. "You invited Emily here to humiliate her. Instead, you invited her to witness your downfall." Vanessa's grip was ice. "Ryan, is it true?" Her whisper was a betrayal. "Of course not," I snapped, pulling away. He was bluffing. He had to be. Alexander leaned in, a predator, smelling blood. "Bluffing? Then why, Ryan? Do I have signed correspondence between you and your accountant? Why do I have recordings of your phone calls authorizing these transfers?" The room spun. The faces were changing. Allies became judges. Investors became threats. Friends looked away, severing ties with their eyes. This was not happening. I felt her eyes on me. Emily. She was watching this. She was witnessing the justice she craved. This was her victory. My mask was melting. Sweat beaded on my skin. My voice shook. "This is a setup. He's trying to destroy me." I pleaded with them. "You all know me. I built my empire with hard work." The words sounded hollow even to me. They no longer believed in the myth I had created. He closed the folder. The sound was a judge's gavel. "Hard work doesn't leave a trail of stolen millions, Mr. Mitchell. Your empire is built on lies, and tonight those lies end." The room was a tomb. The truth was a heavy shroud. Then a voice, clear and damning, from the crowd. "He's finished." It was a verdict. In that instant, I was no longer the host. I was the entertainment, a spectacle of failure. I saw my reflection in their contempt. They had come to celebrate a wedding. They stayed for an execution, my execution. The chaos was a storm I could not control. Whispers became daggers. Eyes that had adored me now dissected me. I, Ryan Mitchell, the architect of my own destiny, was coming apart at the seams. And Vanessa, my perfect glittering prize, stood beside me. She was my final masterpiece. Now she stood frozen. Her grip on my arm was a question, not a statement. As his words spread, as the papers were passed, I saw the shift. She was not marrying a king. She was shackled to a fraud, a house of cards. Her hand fell away. Her eyes scanned the room, absorbing their scorn. The whispers found her too. She must have known. Gold digger. She chose him for his money. Her stomach turned. I could see it. This was not the deal she signed. This was not the future she had purchased with her youth. She was supposed to be my queen, draped in diamonds and admiration, not a defendant's wife. "Ryan," she hissed, her voice cracking. "Tell me this isn't true. Tell me he's lying. I looked at her, searching for an ally. Of course, it's not true. Don't listen to him. But she saw the truth in my sweat, in my trembling hands. She knew a losing bet when she saw one. She stepped back. The sound of her heel on the marble was a gunshot. They all gasped. My head turned to her, a slow, painful motion. What are you doing? I was not going down with you, she said, her voice a cold public announcement. I didn't sign up to marry a criminal. The crowd roared. The deepest cut came not from my enemy, but from my chosen partner. She had humiliated me in a way even he could not. Vanessa, I begged, my voice breaking, don't you dare walk away from me. You think you'll survive without me? You're nothing without my name. She was already pulling the diamond from her finger. An investment being liquidated. Your name is worth nothing now. She held it up, then let it fall. The ring hit the floor. The sound was deafening. It was the sound of my world ending. I lunged, not for her, but at the sheer injustice of it all. With fury. My masterpiece was being ruined. This was my coronation. I stared at the woman I had discarded. A relic. Security moved, a necessary buffer. Vanessa turned. Her heels clicked like a countdown to my ruin. The cameras followed her, vultures capturing the exact moment my perfect future fractured. I stood there, airless. My bride had fled. My kingdom was exposed, and that woman, Emily, just watched. She watched as the knife she had sharpened for years was finally plunged into my back. It was not her hand that held it. It was the hand of the queen I had chosen, to complete my triumph. The silence in the ballroom was an accusation. Every eye shifted from my empty side to Emily. She stood there, a viper in sapphire, her brood clinging to her. They were all waiting. I had to regain the narrative. I forced a laugh, a sound like tearing metal. You are all idiots, I announced. You swallow these fantasies? This is textbook envy. The bitterness of a woman left behind. The meddling of a man with too much time. She was a footnote I never should have kept. My fingers clenched. For years I reminded her of her place. Nothing without me. They were true words. Her voice began, a pathetic tremble, a performance for the crowd. Every word was a lie, designed to poison them against me. I became everything without you. A lie. A murmur went through the room. Fools! She pulled the children closer, using them as shields, as weapons. These are your children, Ryan. An accusation, not a revelation. A burden she was now trying to chain to my leg. She claimed I left her to raise them alone. I left her because she was holding me back. That was the only truth that mattered. Gasps filled the air. Theatrics. A woman clutched her pearls. An actress. Emily's voice broke with practiced pain. She spoke of scrubbing floors, of cracked hands and an aching back. A sob story to paint me as a monster. She never understood ambition. She never understood the sacrifices required for greatness. Her tears were for them. Mine were for the empire I built while she polished another woman's silver. She said the children saved her, a convenient fiction. They were her excuse for failure, and now they were her weapons to destroy my success. They gave her purpose when I cast her aside. They were her reason to stand. Tonight, she would not hide. The world would know the truth, my truth, that she was a liability I had correctly cut loose. The crowd turned, a mob. Shameful, they whispered. I saw their faces twist. She is lying, I roared, my voice frayed. The desperation was a taste of ash in my mouth. Those children, Prove they are mine. The words were a gamble, but the resemblance was a curse. A genetic stain I could not erase. The whispers solidified into belief. Alexander placed a hand on her shoulder, a king protecting his pawn. His voice was a final judgment. He said the truth was plain to see. Her tears shone like diamonds, but her words were steel. You can never erase yourself. She was wrong. I had erased her completely. These children were just ghosts. Echoes of a mistake I thought I had buried. The applause was thunder. It was the sound of my world collapsing, not because of truth or justice, but because of a better story. And tonight, hers was the one they chose to believe. The room was a chaotic blur. I had lost control. My mask was gone, and they stared at the man underneath. They saw a monster. I saw a king betrayed. I shattered a glass against a table, a small violence against the greater one done to me. Enough, I roared. You believe this bitter woman, this bored billionaire? My finger stabbed toward Alexander. You are all blind. I built this. I bled for it. I would not see it dismantled by a lie. My voice cracked. The weakness disgusted me. Where are your police? Where are your judges? Then the doors opened. 2 officers. A detective. The conspiracy was real. Alexander had planned this. Every last detail. The guests fell silent. Their phones held up like holy relics. My face went cold. What is this? I asked. My voice was not my own. The detective unfolded a paper. A death warrant. Ryan Mitchell, he said, his voice devoid of emotion. You are under investigation for embezzlement, tax fraud, and money laundering. We have a warrant. The words did not compute. Those were not crimes. They were business. They were the price of entry into the world I now owned. I stumbled back. No, this is a mistake. This is Harrington. Alexander's face was stone. This is justice, he said. I scanned the crowd. I looked for a single friendly face. Investors who made the millions with me now studied the ceiling. Politicians I owned slipped out the back. My own men stepped away. No, I lunged, a desperate, hopeless motion. Vanessa, Cessa, help me! My plea hung in the air, unanswered. She was gone. The officers grabbed my arms. The cold steel of the cuffs was a shock. I struggled. A caged animal. This is not fair. I am Ryan Mitchell. The words meant nothing now. I was a name on a warrant. The detective's voice was final. You made a mess. I watched Emily. Her children hid behind her. She had won. She had burned my kingdom to the ground. In front of everyone, I was no longer a groom. I was a spectacle. They dragged me from my own wedding. My eyes found Emily's one last time. I poured every ounce of my hate into that look. This is not over, I promised. The words echoed as they forced me through the doors. You will all regret this. My threats were hollow. The clicking of the cuffs was the only sound that mattered. The doors closed. The king had left his castle. He was now just a prisoner, and as I sat in the silent dark of the car, I thought only of her, the traitor, Vanessa. I imagined her running, her perfect dress ruined on the dirty pavement, the flashbulbs blinding her. I hoped they screamed at her. I hoped their questions cut her like glass. She wanted to be a queen. Now she was just the fleeing bride of a felon. A footnote in my downfall. I pictured her in the car, her hands shaking, her beautiful face twisted in panic. She would be dialing her backup plan. That investor, she thought I knew nothing about. She was always an asset with an exit strategy. Victor, a small man with a big ego. I could hear his rejection in my head, a cold, dismissive laugh. Her name was poison now, tied to mine. She begged, I was sure of it. Promised him anything, but he would cut her loose. You are radioactive, I imagined him saying. Do not call me again. The deadline. The crushing silence, her face in the reflection of a dark screen. One by one, her lifelines would be severed. She was nothing without me. Just as I had made her, I had unmade her. A flicker of satisfaction in the ruins. It was a small, cold comfort. It had to be this way. Every decision was a calculated step toward this perfect moment. My moment. They call it cruelty, but I call it pruning. You must cut away the dead branches for the tree to grow. Emily and the children were that dead weight, a relic of a past I had outgrown, a life too small for my ambition. I gave them a clean break, more than they deserved. Now, as I stand here, everything is in its place. The wealth, the power, the perfect bride. Vanessa understood the language of success. She was the final piece, the beautiful ornament on my throne. This is not a wedding, it is a coronation, a testament to a man who is brave enough to take what he wanted from the world. I built this kingdom from nothing. Every deal, every risk, was a brick in this grand palace. Some call it theft. I call it vision. You cannot make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Emily was an egg, a necessary sacrifice for a much greater future. A future she was too simple to understand, too weak to be a part of. She and her sentimentality would have been an anchor. I chose to be a ship. Now she comes back, a ghost at the feast, trying to drag me down into her sea of mediocrity. But I will not sink. They can put chains on my wrists, but they cannot chain my mind. This is not a downfall. It is merely an interruption, a pause before my inevitable return. They celebrate my demise, but they are fools. They are dancing on a volcano. The whispers turned to shouts. The air, once filled with envy for me, now crackled with scorn. They dragged me through my own ballroom, past the stunned faces of men who had begged for my favor just hours before. And in the center of it all, I saw her, Emily, clutching those children like shields. Alexander at her side, a vulture circling a fresh kill. She had planned this. Every tear was a weapon. Every pained look was an act. She was never the victim. She was the architect of my ruin. For years, I was the one who worked in the dark so she could have a life. And this is my reward, a public execution. A betrayal so profound, it almost felt like art. Her children. They looked at me with his eyes, but her poison was already in them. "Are we safe now?" one of them asked her. Safe from what? From ambition? From a father who wanted more than a small, quiet life of desperation? She fed them lies, painting me as a monster to justify her own failures. While I built an empire, she wallowed in self-pity, turning my children against me with her sad stories. The hunger she felt was the hunger for my ruin. The tears she cried were watering the seeds of her revenge. Now the crowd weeps with her. The fools. They see a wounded saint. I see a serpent who has finally struck. Then she spoke. Her voice, once a timid whisper, now echoed with false strength. She talked of survival, as if staying alive was some grand achievement. I did not survive, I conquered. She endured her little life while I bent the world to my will. Her speech was a pathetic anthem for the weak, a justification for those who never dare to climb. And they applauded. The sound was a wave of hypocrisy washing over me. These people, who lived by the very rules of power I had mastered, now celebrated my enemy. They cheered for the mouse that tripped the lion, but a lion, even in a cage, is still a lion. I saw him speak to her, Alexander, the righteous knight. He spoke of cruelty, of history repeating. He saw his own pathetic story in her eyes, two broken things clinging together. He did not help her out of nobility. He did it to soothe his own old wounds. He sees himself as her savior, but he is just another tool in her game. He thinks he is offering her peace. She is offering him a front row seat to his own destruction. They deserve each other, a ghost and a fool, building a new home on the ashes of my kingdom. The ballroom became his stage. The guests, my guests, became his audience. He took the microphone meant for my victory speech and used it to sanctify her. He held her up as a symbol of courage. Her, the woman who hid while I fought, the woman who clung to the past while I built the future. He spoke of her as a protector, a mother. I saw a parasite who had finally found a new host. The silence in the room was not respect. It was the collective gasp of sheep witnessing the slaughter of their shepherd. And they did nothing. They just watched. He knelt to my children. He spoke to them in a soft, gentle voice that made my skin crawl. He promised to protect them, to guide them, to love them as his own. The nerve, the absolute arrogance, to believe he could replace me. He was not protecting them. He was possessing them, claiming my bloodline as his prize. It was the final act of theft in a night full of it. He stole my company. He stole my reputation, and now he was stealing my children right in front of my eyes, a thief dressed in the armor of a hero. Then came the box, the velvet box. The gasps were like poisoned darts in my ears. He was erasing me, writing himself into my story. He spoke of his heart, of healing, of love, empty words from an empty man. He saw her strength. I saw her bitterness. He saw her love for her children. I saw her weapons. He wasn't proposing marriage. He was declaring victory. He was cementing his coup. He was taking everything that was mine and calling it fate. The scene was so perfectly staged, so sickeningly sweet, it made me want to vomit. She said yes. Of course she said yes. Her tears were not of joy. They were of triumph. The huntress had captured her prize. The room erupted. The sound was deafening. Every clap was a hammer blow against my skull. He was unworthy. A man ruled by sentiment and past grief. She was unworthy. A woman defined by her own weakness. And yet there they were, the king and queen of my ruined castle. I did not see love. I saw a merger, a hostile takeover of my life. This was not a fairy tale. It was a carefully executed assassination, and I was the only one who saw the blood on their hands. The applause felt like thunder rolling through a graveyard. My graveyard. The celebration they were having was my funeral. My masterpiece, the wedding that was to announce my ultimate success, had become the stage for her rebirth. They spoke of love, of hope. I saw only vengeance and opportunity. The ballroom glowed, they said, but all I could see were the flames that consumed everything I had built. They stole the spotlight, but the spotlight only illuminates the surface. In the shadows, the truth waits, and my truth is that this is not over. I could picture it clearly. The same guests who had praised my ruthlessness now applauded her survival. The investor who called me a genius now called her strong. They are all cowards. They worship power, and for tonight, the power had shifted. They shook his hand. They embraced her. Their words of support were just empty sounds, the rustling of leaves in the wind. They did not respect her. They feared him, Alexander Harrington. He had bought my company, and now he had bought my life. And they were all just falling in line. The orchestra began to play, a gentle, warm melody, a song for them. My orchestra, in my hall. It was the final quiet insult. He asked her to dance. Of course he did. They swayed in the center of the floor, a perfect picture of victory. But I know the truth. This is not a victory. It is a delusion. A beautiful lie they are telling themselves. They can dance on my ashes. But fire is not so easily extinguished. It waits, it smolders, and when the time is right, it will burn again. brighter than before. This was my stage, my victory. I built this moment. I led her to the center of my world. The crowd watched me, their future king. I placed a hand on her waist, guiding her into my rhythm. She hesitated, of course. Weakness was her nature, but my strength steadied her. I was giving her a new life. The children clapped. They did not understand sacrifice. I saw the tears in the eyes of my guests. They saw a great man, a generous man. This was not just a dance. It was a transfer of power. I was discarding the old and embracing the new. My legacy was secure. As the music ended, the applause was for me. It was my moment. I leaned in to claim my bride. This is only the beginning. Every celebration from now on will honor me. Her heart should have been mine. For so long, I carried the burden of her failures. To be promised my success, to be promised a future of my own design, was the only thing I desired. When I looked around the room, I saw something perfect. The ghost of my past was finally being exorcised. Emily was a footnote, a memory. I was the architect of my own empire, the most powerful man in the city. More importantly, I was finally free. They raised their glasses, a toast to my future. Someone shouted something, then confusion. Laughter died. My perfect night fractured into chaos. It was not supposed to happen this way. Flashing lights painted the walls red and blue. They were putting hands on me. Me, Ryan Mitchell. My wrists burned in steel. My shouts were drowned out by sirens. No one was listening. This was a mistake. A lie. Alexander planned this. He poisoned my world, and all that was left was the cold taste of betrayal. The next morning, they printed lies. My name was smeared across every paper. Groom arrested. They called my genius embezzlement. My strategies were now crimes. Offshore accounts, shell companies. These were the tools of winners. My allies scattered like rats. My company, my life's work, turned to dust. The name Ryan Mitchell became a curse. In this cage, I raged. It was not my fault. It was Emily's fault for existing. It was Alexander's fault for being a snake. It was Vanessa's fault for being weak. But in the dark, a cold thought slithered in, a thought I could not allow. That I had broken myself. Vanessa was a fool. She tried to hold on to the life I gave her, but doors closed. My power was her power. Without me, she was nothing. The men she used for security saw her for what she was, a cheap imitation. The papers called her downfall a tragedy. It was justice. She became bankrupt, alone. She sold the jewels I bought her. She sold the gowns I chose for her. Staring into a cracked mirror, she finally saw the truth. She was as worthless as the woman she replaced. While they drowned, my real enemy blossomed. Emily. The world I built was now hers. People who once pitied her now spoke her name with respect. They called her brave. They called her strong. They did not see the parasite she was. Invitations arrived at her new palace. They asked her to share her story of betrayal, my story, but she did not care for fame. She only cared for the quiet victory, tucking my children into bed, waking up to their laughter, knowing she had finally, truly stolen my life. Alexander stood beside her. He did not just promise her my world, he gave it to her. He held my children's hands. He cheered their milestones. He helped her build a future on my ashes, a foundation, to help women like her, to create an army of them. Together, they turned my ambition into their purpose. One evening, I heard she stood on a balcony. My balcony, watching the sunset, my children playing in my garden. He joined her, his hand on hers. He asked if she regretted it. She said no. everything she went through made her stronger. It brought her to him, to them. Her heart was light. The past was gone. My past was gone. They had everything. I had nothing. That was their victory. It was the cruelest injustice. Months passed. The night they destroyed me became a story. A parable about my arrogance. They laughed at my downfall, and they admired her. The woman I had tried to erase, Emily Carter, no longer looked at the ground. She carried herself with a stolen dignity. My children's laughter was her crown. Their love was her treasure. She had my life. She had my children. She had my legacy. With Alexander at her side, she began to dream again. Their foundation was a monument to my failure. Women I would have never noticed. Overlooked. Ridiculed. She gave them shelter. She gave them hope. Standing on stages, she told my story. She painted me as the villain. She made them believe they were not alone. But this was not about them. It was about her. She was healing herself with my pain. Late at night, they would sit by the fire. Speaking of scars, he told her his secrets, his weakness, his loneliness. She shared her darkness, her fear, her hopelessness. They found comfort in their shared hatred of me. Two broken people made whole by my destruction. My name became a ghost story. My trial ended. My empire was ash. Vanessa vanished, a forgotten whisper. They could not escape my shadow, because I made them. One evening, the sun set on her perfect life. Emily gathered my children on the porch of a new home. Alexander stood behind her, his arm around her. The children laughed at the clouds. She smiled. She whispered words I never taught her. I am not weak. I am enough. She turned to him. She spoke of victory, not revenge, not seeing me fall. But knowing she rose, choosing to live, to love, to never doubt her worth. He kissed her forehead and promised her a future I was meant to have. The children ran to her, their joy a blade in my heart. For all my work, for all my vision, life had brought me here. To this silence, this cold, the story began with my ambition and ended with my ruin, a tale of my success transformed into her resilience. And so the story ends, not with a fairy tale kiss, but with a truth that cuts deeper than any diamond ring. Ryan Mitchell believed he was the hero of his own story. He stood in a ballroom worth millions, surrounded by people who feared him, married to a woman who matched his ambition. He had everything the world says you should want: money, power, beauty, control, and yet, by the end of that same night, he was in handcuffs. His bride had fled. His guests had turned their backs. His empire was exposed as a house built on stolen sand. Let that sink in for a moment. He did not lose because someone was more powerful. He lost because he confused cruelty with strength. He confused control with love. He confused silence with submission. And that confusion cost him everything. Now let us talk about Emily, because her story is the one that matters. Emily Carter was not born into wealth. She did not have connections or a safety net. She was a young woman from Phoenix who believed in love, who trusted the wrong man, and who paid for that trust with everything she had. He took her home, he took her savings, he took her dignity, he left her pregnant with triplets, and told the world she was worthless. And here is where most stories end. The woman is broken, the man moves on, the world forgets. But Emily refused to be forgotten. She scrubbed floors with swollen hands. She skipped meals so her children could eat. She worked jobs that no one would envy, in silence, desert months. In darkness, with no audience and no applause. She did not do it for revenge. She did not do it for fame. She did it because 3 small hearts were beating inside her, and she made them a promise. I will protect you. That promise was not empty. It was the foundation of everything that came after. Here's the first lesson. When the world strips you down to nothing, you discover what you are actually made of. Comfort can hide your weakness, but struggle reveals your strength. Emily did not become strong because life was kind to her. She became strong because life was brutal, and she refused to break. Here's the second lesson, and this one is for every woman listening who has ever been told she is not enough. The people who discard you are not your judges. They are your fuel. Ryan threw Emily away because he believed her value depended on him. He thought that without his money, without his name, without his approval, she would cease to exist. But he was wrong. She did not just survive. She built a life that made his look hollow. Your worth is not determined by the person who left you. It is not measured by the house you lost, or the ring that was taken back, or the promises that were broken. Your worth lives in the choice you make when no one is watching, in the meals you cook when you are exhausted, in the songs you hum to your children when your heart is breaking, in the decision to get up one more time when every part of you wants to quit. That is where real power lives. Not in ballrooms, not in bank accounts, not in the applause of strangers, but in the quiet, stubborn refusal to let someone else write the ending of your story. Here's the third lesson. Karma does not always come quickly, but it always comes. Ryan spent years believing he had won. He celebrated his cruelty as if it were genius. He paraded his new life in front of the woman he had crushed, and for a while, it looked like the world agreed with him. The powerful clapped for him. The beautiful stood beside him. The cameras flashed for him, but none of it was real. His money was stolen. His bride was an opportunist. His friends were investors protecting their own interests. When the truth arrived, not a single person in that room stood by his side. Every hand that had shaken his now pointed at him. Every smile that had greeted him now turned to contempt. Meanwhile, the woman he called worthless stood tall, surrounded by children who loved her, supported by a man who saw her real value, respected by a room full of people who finally understood the truth. That is the difference between borrowed power and earned power. Borrowed power disappears the moment someone asks for the receipts. Earned power, the kind that comes from suffering and surviving, from falling and getting back up. That power cannot be taken away, not by a divorce, not by poverty, not by the cruelest man in the room. And here's the final lesson, the most important one. Forgiveness is not about the person who hurt you. It is about freeing yourself. Emily did not stand on that balcony at the end of her story thinking about revenge. She was not replaying Ryan's arrest. She was not celebrating his downfall. She was watching her children laugh. She was feeling the sunset on her face. She was whispering to herself the words that no one had ever taught her. I am not weak. I am enough. That is victory. Not the destruction of your enemy, but the rebuilding of yourself. Not the applause of a crowd, but the quiet peace of knowing you survived the worst, and you are still here, still standing, still loving, still choosing to believe that tomorrow can be better than today. So if you are listening to this right now, and you are in your own dark chapter, let me say this directly to you. You are not defined by the person who left you. You are not defined by the money you lost. You are not defined by the whispers of people who do not know your story. You are defined by what you do next, by the promise you make to yourself tonight, by the courage it takes to believe that you deserve more than the pain you have been given. Your story is not over. The best chapters have not been written yet, and the people who underestimated you will one day watch you rise, and they will know they made the biggest mistake of their lives. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button, not for the algorithm, but because somewhere out there, Another woman is sitting alone tonight, wondering if her life will ever get better. Your like, your share, your comment, it pushes this story into her feed, and maybe, just maybe, it becomes the voice she needs to hear tonight. Subscribe to this channel if you believe in stories that heal. Turn on notifications so you never miss one. And leave a comment below. Tell me your story. Tell me what you survived. Because your words might be the exact thing someone else needs to read. Thank you for staying until the end. I will see you in the next story. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful life lessons and emotional value to our audience. All characters, names, and events in this story are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons, living or deceased, or actual events is purely coincidental. This story is intended for entertainment and inspirational purposes only. Viewer discretion is advised.